The hum of the fluorescent lights in the terminal seemed to mock the frantic, joyous energy I'd harbored for months, an energy now rapidly deflating like a pricked balloon. This trip, this glorious, sun-drenched escape to the Italian coast, had been my dream, my meticulously planned gift to a family I thought cherished me, or at least, pretended to well enough. I'd paid for everything, every flight, every five-star room, every pre-booked tour of ancient ruins and every anticipated scoop of gelato. It was a considerable sum, the kind that represented years of careful saving, of quiet sacrifices made while raising my son, Daniel, and later, doting on his children, Lily and Tom. Daniel and his wife, Sarah, had expressed such enthusiasm, their faces alight with an almost theatrical gratitude when I'd presented the itinerary, bound in a leather folio, months ago. "Oh, Mom, you shouldn't have." Sarah had gushed, her hand flying to her chest, while Daniel clapped me on the shoulder, a rare display of physical affection. "This is incredible." Truly, even the usually sullen teenagers, Lily and Tom, had managed to crack smiles, their eyes gleaming with visions of turquoise waters and endless pizza. Now, standing amidst the controlled chaos of Gate 42B, their luggage, a vibrant mountain of designer bags I'd also partially funded through generous vacation wardrobe contributions, was gone. So were they. Daniel had muttered something about needing to grab a forgotten magazine from a shop near the entrance, Sarah trailing after him with a forced, tight smile, saying they'd be right back. Lily and Tom, headphones already plastered to their ears, had simply followed, oblivious or indifferent. That was 20 minutes ago. 20 minutes that stretched into an eternity of dawning, sickening realization. My calls to Daniel's phone went straight to voicemail, each unanswered ring a hammer blow against the fragile hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. The flight was boarding. The final call echoed, impersonal and insistent. I clutched my own small carry-on, the one containing my passport, my medications, and, crucially, the folder with every single confirmation, every payment receipt, every voucher, all in my name, linked to my credit cards. A cold dread, sharp and visceral, began to seep into my bones, far colder than the air-conditioned chill of the terminal. They hadn't forgotten a magazine. They had forgotten me. Or rather, they had deliberately, calculatedly, left me behind. The cruelty of it was a physical ache, a tightening in my chest that made it hard to breathe. Why? The question screamed in my mind, a silent, tearing shriek. Was I too slow? A burden? An embarrassment? Had my meticulous planning, my desire for everything to be perfect, become an annoyance they could no longer tolerate? The memory of Sarah's strained smile, Daniel's averted gaze as he'd mumbled his excuse, now seemed damning evidence of a premeditated act. This wasn't an oversight, this was an excision. They were on that plane, soaring towards the sun, believing they had shed their inconvenient matriarch, ready to enjoy the fruits of my labor without the labor herself. The sheer audacity, the profound betrayal, left me gasping. My meticulously crafted dream was morphing into a nightmare, live, in real time, under the indifferent gaze of strangers rushing to their own departures. The final boarding call was a death knell to the image I'd held of my loving family. The gate agent was looking pointedly in my direction, a polite but firm inquiry in her eyes. My world, just moments ago vibrant with anticipation, had shrunk to this cold, plastic seat, this echoing hall, and the crushing weight of an abandonment so profound it stole the air from my lungs. My Italian dream, paid for in full, was taking off without me, or so they believed. But they had made one colossal miscalculation. They had forgotten who held all the cards, quite literally. The anger, a slow, hot tide, began to rise, battling the icy despair. It wasn't just about the money. It was about respect, about love, about the fundamental decency they had so casually discarded. And in that moment, amidst the debris of my shattered expectations, a new, fierce resolve began to crystallize. They had left me alone at the airport, not knowing I had paid for the entire trip. And so, I decided. Oh, I decided. The gate agent's voice, soft but firm, finally broke through the roaring in my ears. Are you boarding? This is the final call for flight AZ673 to Rome. Her eyes held a flicker of concern, perhaps mistaking my stunned silence for confusion or sudden illness. I looked at her, truly saw her, for the first time, this young woman in her neat uniform, a gatekeeper to a journey I was meant to share. The pain was still there, a raw, gaping wound in my chest, but something else was stirring within me now, something hard and unyielding. It was the steely core that had seen me through widowhood, through financial struggles, through the myriad challenges of a life lived fully, if not always easily. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, a tremor of its future resolve already present. No, I won't be boarding that flight. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Is everything all right? I offered a small, brittle smile. Everything is about to be, my dear. A sudden change of plans, you see. I watched as she nodded, made a quick note on her tablet, and turned her attention to the final procedures for closing the gate. The muffled thud of the jet bridge retracting was a strangely definitive sound, a severance. They were gone. Truly gone. And I was here. Alone. The initial shock was morphing, transmuting into a cold, clear anger. Not the hot, messy kind that leads to tears and public displays, but a focused, glacial fury that sharpened my thoughts and steeled my spine. How could they? Daniel, my son, the baby I had nursed, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose triumphs I had celebrated with a heart bursting with pride. Sarah, who I had welcomed into the family with open arms, sharing recipes and secrets, believing her to be a daughter. Even the grandchildren, Lily and Tom, for whom I would have walked through fire, had trotted off without a backward glance. The betrayal wasn't just deep, it was absolute. It reeked of a breathtaking arrogance, a casual cruelty that suggested this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, but perhaps a long-held, unspoken resentment or, worse, a calculated convenience. They must have assumed I'd just, turn around and meekly take a taxi home, tail between my legs, perhaps cry into my tea for a few days and then forgive them because, well, that's what mothers and grandmothers do, isn't it? We absorb, we forgive, we forget. We are the eternal wellspring of unconditional love and endless second chances. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, but it was quickly followed by a surge of defiance. Not this time. This time, the script would be different. I opened my carry-on and pulled out the leather-bound folio. My name, Eleanor Vance, was embossed in small gold letters in the corner. Inside, pristine and orderly, were all the documents. Flight confirmations, hotel reservations for a magnificent suite overlooking the Amalfi Coast, car rental agreements for a charming little Fiat Toodle-around inn, prepaid passes to museums, vouchers for wine tastings and cooking classes. All booked by Eleanor Vance. All paid for by Eleanor Vance. All easily changeable or cancelable by Eleanor Vance. A slow, predatory smile touched my lips. It felt foreign, yet strangely exhilarating. They thought they were on a luxurious, all-expenses-paid vacation. They were, in fact, on a very expensive, self-inflicted wild goose chase, with no resources and no plan B. They had the tickets for this outbound flight, yes, because I'd checked us all in online the night before and Daniel had insisted on holding everyone's boarding passes, a move that now seemed laden with sinister intent. But beyond that, beyond the arrival in Rome, they had nothing. No hotel. No transfers. No return flights. Nothing but the rapidly dwindling balance on their own credit cards, which I knew for a fact Sarah was always complaining were maxed out. The airport, which a few moments ago had felt like a desolate prison, now seemed like a launch pad. My launch pad. The possibilities unfurled before me, intoxicating and empowering. I could cancel everything, of course. Leave them stranded and teach them a lesson in humility and consequence. That was tempting, undeniably so. The thought of Daniel's panicked face, Sarah's erect tears, brought a grim satisfaction. But then another thought, even more delicious, began to take shape. Why should I deny myself the pleasure of this trip? A trip I had dreamed of, planned meticulously, and paid for with my own hard-earned money, simply because they had proven themselves to be vipers. My fingers, surprisingly steady, tapped the screen of my phone, pulling up the airline's website. The flight to Rome was gone, a ghost ship sailing towards an illusion. But there were other flights, other destinations, other dreams waiting to be claimed. My original itinerary, the one lovingly crafted for four, felt tainted now, each pre-booked experience a reminder of their betrayal. No, this would be my trip, on my terms. The name Eleanor Vance on all those documents was not just a name, it was a key, and I was about to unlock a very different kind of adventure. First, a quick call to my travel agent, the delightful Mr. Henderson, a man whose calm efficiency I had always admired. "Eleanor, my dear," he exclaimed, his voice warm and familiar. "Are you calling from the Roman sunshine already?" I trust the check-in was smooth. There was a brief, sharp pang. "Not exactly, James," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "There's been a rather significant change of plans. My companions will not be joining me." I paused, then added, with a touch of ice, "In fact, they've proceeded to Rome under the mistaken impression that their entire vacation is still on track." James, bless his professional discretion, didn't pry. There was a moment of silence, then, "I see. And what would you like to do, Eleanor?" "You know I'm here to assist in any way I can." This was my loyal legal ally, or as close as I could get in this scenario, a man who understood bookings, cancellations, and the power of the named cardholder. "James," I began, a newfound resolve hardening my tone, "I want you to cancel every hotel booking, every tour, every transfer associated with the original Italian itinerary. Effective immediately. Can you ensure there will be no charges, or that any cancellation fees are minimal given the circumstances, which I will explain later if necessary?" I could almost hear him typing. "Consider it done, Eleanor. Under your name, those are your reservations to command." Most have flexible cancellation policies, especially for the primary booker. There might be a small fee for the Amalfi Suite if it's within a certain window, but I'll see what I can negotiate. "And for you? What are your wishes?" A fierce joy, cold and exhilarating, surged through me. "For me, James," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, "I'm thinking somewhere different. Somewhere they wouldn't expect. Somewhere utterly fabulous. Perhaps a charming boutique hotel in Paris I once read about. Or maybe the Swiss Alps, all serene lakes and majestic mountains. Or even, dare I say, a luxurious spa retreat where I can be utterly pampered and contemplate the vicissitudes of modern family life." I could hear the smile in his voice. "Eleanor, you sound like a woman on a mission. Let's explore Paris. I have just the place in mind, a little jewel in Saint-Germain. And perhaps a first-class upgrade on the flight." "You deserve it, James," I purred, "you read my mind. Book it. 4-1. And James, any communication from a Daniel or Sarah Vance regarding their Italian bookings, you know nothing. Refer them to me if you must, though I suspect I'll be incommunicado for a while." He chuckled. "Consider them ghosted, Eleanor. Your Parisian escape is being crafted as we speak. I'll email you the confirmations within the hour." The call ended, and I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years, even before this debacle. The weight of their expectations, their subtle demands, their casual taking for granted, had lifted. I was no longer just Eleanor Vance, mother and grandmother, dutiful and accommodating. I was Eleanor Vance, solo adventurer, architect of my own destiny, and purveyor of some rather exquisite poetic justice. The airport announcements for other flights, other destinations, now sounded like a siren song of possibilities. My gaze fell upon a departure board, Paris, 2 hours. It was perfect. Far from Italy, far from their anticipated path. I would go to Paris. I would sip champagne, wander through art galleries, indulge in patisseries, and revel in my newfound freedom. And my dear family. They would arrive in Rome to discover a landscape far bleaker than any ancient ruin, a landscape devoid of my funds, my planning, and my presence. The thought of their dawning horror was a delicious aperitif to the feast of my impending journey. The journey to Paris was a revelation in itself. Tucked into a plush first-class seat, a glass of surprisingly good champagne fizzing delicately in my hand, I felt a sense of liberation so profound it was almost giddy. The seat next to me, blissfully empty, was a silent testament to my altered plans. No passive-aggressive sighs from Sarah about the legroom, no Daniel manspreading into my space, no teenagers glued to their screens, emanating an aura of bored indifference. Just me, the gentle hum of the engines, and the unfolding panorama of clouds below, looking like soft, ethereal continents. I had exchanged the anticipated boisterous, demanding chaos of a family trip for the serene, introspective pleasure of solo travel. And it was glorious. The flight attendant, a charming young woman named Sophie, treated me with a deferential warmth that was a balm to my recently bruised spirit. She refilled my champagne without being asked, offered me an array of delectable snacks, and even engaged me in a brief, pleasant conversation about Parisian hidden gems. It struck me then, with a pang of clarity, how long it had been since I'd felt truly seen, truly catered to, without the underlying expectation of my own servitude in return. At home, I was the cook, the cleaner, the babysitter, the financial fallback. My needs, my desires, were always secondary, an afterthought once everyone else was satisfied. Even this grand Italian trip, my supposed gift to them, had been orchestrated around their preferences, their schedules, their fickle tastes. I landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport feeling not a trace of fatigue, but rather an invigorating surge of anticipation. Mr. Henderson, true to his word, had arranged everything flawlessly. A polite driver with a small sign bearing MME Vance was waiting for me. The car was a sleek, comfortable Mercedes, a far cry from the cramped minivan I'd originally booked for the 5 of us in Italy. As we glided through the Parisian streets, the city unfolding around me in all its iconic beauty, the grand Haussmannian buildings, the bustling cafes, the distant silhouette of the Eiffel Tower, I felt a smile play on my lips, genuine and unforced. This was not the trip I had planned, but perhaps it was the trip I needed. The hotel was a dream, a small, exquisitely appointed establishment tucked away on a quiet side street in Saint-Germain-des-Prés. My room was a haven of understated luxury, with high ceilings, antique furniture, a sumptuously comfortable bed, and a balcony overlooking a charming little courtyard. A bouquet of pale pink roses, my favorite, sat on the writing desk with a handwritten welcome note from the manager. Mr. Henderson's thoughtful touch, no doubt. After settling in, I wandered out, drawn by the irresistible allure of the neighborhood. I found a quaint bistro with red check tablecloths and ordered a croque monsieur and a glass of chilled Sancerre. Eating alone felt strange at first, a little conspicuous, but then a sense of peace settled over me. I could eat at my own pace, savor every bite, without anyone complaining about the food, rushing me, or scrolling ND texting through the meal. I watched the world go by, the effortlessly chic Parisians, the lovers strolling hand in hand, the animated groups of friends sharing laughter and wine. There was a vibrancy, an elegance, a joie de vivre that was utterly captivating. Later, I ambled along the Seine, the late afternoon sun casting a golden glow on the water. I browsed the bouquinist stalls, inhaling the scent of old paper and ink, and bought myself a beautifully illustrated edition of Proust, a treat I would never have considered with the family in tow. They'd have deemed it boring, pretentious. This was my time, my indulgence. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in hues of lavender and rose, I found myself thinking of Daniel, Sarah, Lily, and Tom. They would be in Rome by now, or perhaps still at Fiumicino Airport, the initial thrill of arrival rapidly dissolving into confusion and then dawning panic as they discovered no arranged transport, no hotel confirmations under their names, no welcoming committee. The image brought not a vindictive cackle, but a cool, detached satisfaction. They had sown the wind, and they were about to reap the whirlwind. The money they had expected to fund their lavish holiday was currently paying for my Parisian idyll, for my peace of mind, for this exquisite, unexpected detour into self-discovery. And this, I thought, sipping a final glass of wine on my balcony before bed, was only the beginning of their education. The first few days in Paris were a symphony of quiet indulgences and rediscovered pleasures. I woke when I pleased, lingered over coffee and croissants at a sun-dappled café, and charted my course for the day based solely on my own whims. There were no squabbles over itineraries, no compromises on restaurant choices, no need to cater to teenage boredom or adult impatience. It was liberating. I visited the Musée d'Orsay, losing myself for hours in the luminous works of the Impressionists, a passion Sarah had always dismissed as fuddy-duddy. I wandered through the Jardin du Luxembourg, watching children sail toy boats on the pond, a scene of such idyllic charm it almost brought tears to my eyes, tears of joy, this time, not sorrow. I bought a ridiculously chic silk scarf from a little boutique, the kind of extravagant trifle I'd never have purchased if I was stewarding funds for the family's collective enjoyment. This was for me, a splash of Parisian blue to mirror the clear sky of my newfound freedom. Each small act of self-care, each moment of solitary pleasure, felt like a stitch mending the tear in my soul. The sharp edges of betrayal were softening, not with forgiveness, but with the balm of self-worth. I realized how much of myself I had allowed to be eroded over the years, subsumed by the collective needs and wants of my family. They had not just taken my money for granted, they had taken me for granted. And I had let them. My phone, which I kept mostly on silent in my bag, would occasionally buzz with a frantic energy. I'd glance at the screen, missed calls from Daniel, a string of increasingly agitated texts from Sarah. "Mom, where are you? We're at Rome Airport, no car. Hotel says no reservation for Vance. What's going on? Lily is upset, Tom is hungry. This isn't funny, Mom. Daniel is trying to call the travel agent, they said they can't help us. Call us immediately." I read them with a calm detachment, a scientist observing a predictable chemical reaction. There was a grim satisfaction, yes, but also a profound sadness for the relationship I thought we'd had. It was like watching a house of cards, built on a foundation of my own making, finally collapse under the weight of their entitlement. Their panic, their inconvenience, was a direct consequence of their own actions. I felt no compulsion to rush in and fix it, as I would have done in the past. That Eleanor was gone, left behind at gate 42B. This Eleanor was currently enjoying a leisurely boat tour on the Seine, marveling at the architecture, a gentle breeze ruffling her hair. One afternoon, while sitting in a charming patisserie, Savoring an exquisite raspberry tart and a café crème, I decided to send a postcard. Not to them, not yet. But to my oldest friend, Martha, back home. I chose a beautiful card depicting the Eiffel Tower at sunset. On the back, I wrote simply, "Having a wonderful, unexpected adventure. Paris is even more beautiful when you're not footing the bill for ingrates. Will tell you all when I return. Love, Eleanor." It felt good to share a sliver of my triumph with someone who would understand, who had witnessed my endless generosity towards my family over the years, often shaking her head in quiet disapproval of their demands. As for Daniel and Sarah, their education was still in its early stages. They were discovering, I imagined, that Rome without a prepaid 5-star reservation and an unlimited expense account courtesy of Mom was a very different city from the one they'd envisioned. Perhaps they were navigating the crowded Termini station, bickering over a map, trying to find a budget hotel that would take 4 disgruntled, unexpected guests. The thought was not without its dark humor. My roses in the hotel room were blooming beautifully, each unfurling petal a small symbol of my own blossoming independence. This trip was no longer about revenge, it was about reclamation. Reclaiming my time, my money, my dignity, and my right to happiness. The crescendo of frantic messages from Italy was, I had to admit, a source of rather compelling entertainment during my quieter moments in Paris. After my initial perusal of their panicked texts, I'd largely ignored the incoming barrage, allowing them to marinate in the stew of their own making. But curiosity, that incorrigible cat, occasionally got the better of me. One evening, after a delightful dinner of coq au vin and a leisurely stroll back to my hotel, I poured myself a small glass of Calvados and decided to check the digital record of their meltdown. Daniel's voicemails had evolved from confused and annoyed, "Mom, where are you? This isn't funny, the kids are tired," to increasingly desperate, "Mom, please pick up. The hotel booking you said you made isn't here. We've tried calling the Amalfi Place, they have nothing for Vance. What is going on?" Sarah's texts were a masterclass in escalating hysteria. "Eleanor, if this is some kind of sick joke, it's not amusing. We are stranded. Stranded. Do you hear me? The children are crying. Lily says she hates Italy. This is your fault. We had to find some awful little pension near the station. It's dirty. There's one bathroom for the whole floor. How could you do this to your own grandchildren? Daniel is trying to book new flights home, but everything is astronomically expensive. You need to transfer us money." Now the sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. Not a single message contained an apology, or even a hint of concern for my well-being after they'd abandoned me. It was all about their discomfort, their inconvenience, their outrage that the luxury tap had been turned off. I pictured them, crammed into some dingy room, the dream of sun-drenched terraces, and gourmet meals replaced by the grim reality of instant noodles and shared bathrooms. The contrast with my own serene existence, the fresh flowers on my bedside table, the plush bathrobe, the view of the softly lit courtyard from my balcony, was almost comically stark. The loyal legal ally, Mr. Henderson, had evidently played his part perfectly, stonewalling their inquiries about the original bookings with polite, unshakable professionalism. They were truly on their own, adrift in a sea of consequences they had themselves charted. I wondered if any glimmer of self-awareness was penetrating their thick skulls. Did Daniel ever stop to think, perhaps leaving Mom at the airport wasn't our brightest idea? Did Sarah pause her tirade to consider that her mother-in-law, the woman she was currently vilifying, was the sole architect of the dream they had so callously tried to hijack? Probably not yet. Their worldview was too deeply entrenched in the conviction of their own importance and my infinite capacity to provide and forgive. One particularly histrionic voicemail from Sarah actually made me laugh out loud, a sharp, clear sound in the quiet of my room. "Eleanor, I swear, when we get back, if we ever get back from this hellhole you've put us in, Daniel is going to have a serious talk with you about your irresponsibility. You've ruined this entire trip for us. The children will be scarred." My irresponsibility. The irony was so thick, you could spread it on a baguette. I had been nothing but responsible, meticulously planning and funding what was meant to be a trip of a lifetime for them. Their actions, however, were the dictionary definition of irresponsible, not to mention cruel and calculating. The innocent grandchildren, Lily and Tom, were a slightly more complex matter in my mind. Had they been complicit in the plan to abandon me? Or were they simply pawns, accustomed to their parents' casual disregard for their grandmother? Lily's supposed hatred of Italy, as reported by Sarah, probably stemmed more from the lack of Wi-Fi in their current squalid accommodation than any genuine geographical aversion. Tom's hunger was likely a product of no longer having access to an endless supply of free gelato. They were teenagers, after all, creatures of comfort and instant gratification. Perhaps this experience, this abrupt collision with reality, would be a more valuable life lesson than any curated tour of the Colosseum. It was certainly teaching them about cause and effect, and the limits of Nana's largesse. I felt a surprising lack of guilt. Any lingering maternal or grandmaternal instincts to rush in and rescue them were thoroughly overshadowed by a steely resolve. They had made their bed, or rather, their lumpy, questionable mattress in a Roman flophouse, and now they had to lie in it. My Parisian adventure, meanwhile, continued to unfold with delightful serendipity. I discovered a tiny, independent cinema that showed classic French films, a hidden gem of a fromagerie with cheeses that tasted like heaven, and the simple joy of people watching from a bench in the Place des Vosges. Each day was a fresh canvas, and I was the artist, painting it with colors of my own choosing. The anticipated phone call, the one I knew would eventually come when their desperation reached its peak, finally arrived on my 5th morning in Paris. I was enjoying a pain au chocolate and a strong café au lait at my favorite local boulangerie, idly watching the world go by, when my phone, which I had uncharacteristically left on the table, vibrated insistently. It was Daniel. I let it ring a few times, savoring the rich, buttery flakes of my pastry, before calmly tapping the answer icon. "Hello," I said, my voice deliberately light and unconcerned. "Mom?" "Mom. Oh, thank God. Where are you? We've been going out of our minds." Daniel's voice was a torrent of relief, frustration, and barely suppressed panic. "Why, Daniel, I'm perfectly fine," I replied, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "Enjoying a rather lovely morning, in fact." "And you? How is Rome?" "Everything you dreamed of." There was a strangled sound on the other end of the line. "Dreamed of?" "Mom, it's a nightmare. The hotel bookings were all gone. The car rental, the tours, everything. We've been stuck in this awful little place for days. Sarah's beside herself, the kids are miserable. We thought something terrible had happened to you." His attempt at feigned concern was almost laughable. "Oh, something terrible nearly did," I said, my voice hardening slightly. Being abandoned at an airport by one's entire family, left to fend for oneself while they jet off on a trip I paid for, yes, I'd classify that as rather terrible, wouldn't you? A heavy silence descended. I could almost hear the gears whirring in his brain as he tried to formulate a response that wasn't utterly incriminating. "Mom, look, there was a misunderstanding at the airport," he stammered, his bluster deflating rapidly. We just got rushed, and we thought you were right behind us. When we realized, on the plane, we couldn't do anything, couldn't you? I asked, my tone laced with ice. You couldn't have alerted the cabin crew? Insisted they contact the gate? Or perhaps, upon landing, your very first act could have been to call me, frantic with worry. Instead, if my phone records are accurate, the first panicked calls came many hours later, when you discovered your luxurious accommodations had mysteriously vanished. Funny, that Sarah's voice, shrill and accusatory, suddenly erupted in the background. She did this to us, Daniel. She deliberately ruined our holiday. Ask her what she's done. Daniel shushed her, but the damage was done. Her true feelings, her sense of thwarted entitlement, were laid bare. Mom, Daniel said, his voice strained, we just need to sort this out. We need money. We can't even afford to change our flights to come home earlier. Can you help us? For the kids' sake. For the kids' sake. The classic emotional blackmail. Daniel, I said, my voice as cold and clear as a winter morning. Let me be unequivocally precise. The trip you are currently experiencing, in all its uncomfortable glory, is the direct and foreseeable consequence of your decision to leave me at that airport. Every booking, every luxurious detail you anticipated, was in my name and paid for by my funds. When I found myself unexpectedly solo, I, naturally, revised my travel plans. Revised, he echoed, a note of dread creeping into his voice. Where are you, Mom? That, I replied, a small, triumphant smile playing on my lips, is entirely my business. Suffice it to say, I am safe, comfortable, and enjoying a rather splendid, if unplanned, vacation. One that I find considerably more pleasant without ungrateful companions, but the money for Italy, he sputtered. The money you budgeted for our trip. Ah, yes, the money, I said smoothly. It's being put to excellent use, I assure you. Funding my current, rather delightful, experiences. As for your financial predicament in Rome, that, my dear Daniel, is entirely your problem to solve. You are an adult. Sarah is an adult. It's high time you both learned the value of €1 you didn't expect someone else to provide. There was a stunned silence, then a sputtering sound. You can't just leave us here like this. Can't I? I countered, my voice dangerously soft. You seem to have no such compunctions about leaving me. Consider this a practical lesson in independence. And perhaps, in future, you'll think twice before treating your mother like an inconvenient piece of luggage, to be checked in and then conveniently forgotten. I could hear Sarah wailing in the background now, a theatrical display of indignation. Daniel was speechless, the full import of my words finally sinking in. The power shift was complete, absolute. They were no longer in control. I was. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said, my tone brisk and dismissive, my croissant is getting cold, and the day awaits. I suggest you start looking into budget bus travel. It can be quiet, character-building. Goodbye, Daniel, and with a decisive tap, I ended the call, severing the connection, both literally and metaphorically. The silence that followed was filled only with the gentle clatter of the boulangerie and the distant sounds of Parisian life. I took another bite of my pain au chocolate. It tasted like victory. My solo Parisian sojourn stretched into a blissful week, then 10 days. Each morning I woke with a sense of quiet anticipation, wondering what small delights the city would offer me. I developed a comfortable routine, a leisurely breakfast at a local cafe, a cultural excursion perhaps to the Rodin Museum, with its powerful sculptures scattered through a serene garden, or a wander through the Marais, with its historic architecture and trendy boutiques, followed by a simple, delicious lunch, and then an afternoon spent reading by the Seine or exploring a new arrondissement. I even took a day trip to Giverny, to see Monet's gardens, a riot of color, and light that filled me with an almost spiritual sense of peace. The contrast between my tranquil, enriching experiences and the imagined chaos of my family's predicament in Rome was a constant, subtle undercurrent of satisfaction. It wasn't schadenfreude, exactly, or at least, not entirely. It was more a profound sense of justice being served, of a natural order reasserting itself. They had sown disrespect and betrayal, they were reaping discomfort and consequence. It was as simple and as complex as that. My phone remained mostly silent after that one dramatic call with Daniel. I imagined they were too busy scrambling to survive, or perhaps too proud, or too ashamed, though I doubted the latter, to contact me again with further pleas. I envisioned them pooling their limited resources, navigating the complexities of budget travel, perhaps even having to ask their own friends, or distant relatives, for a loan to get home. The thought of Sarah, so accustomed to her designer labels and effortless comforts, having to haggle for a cheap hostel bed or eat street food out of necessity, brought a wry smile to my face. This experience, I mused, would either break them or, just possibly, teach them something about resilience and humility. Though, given their track record, I wasn't holding my breath for a sudden personality transplant. One afternoon, while browsing in a charming little art shop, I found a small, exquisite watercolor of a Parisian street scene, remarkably similar to the view from my hotel balcony. I bought it without hesitation. It would be my souvenir, a tangible reminder not of a trip ruined, but of a life reclaimed. It wasn't just about the revenge anymore, it was about the realization that I was, and always had been, perfectly capable of creating my own happiness, my own adventures. I didn't need their validation, their company, or their permission. In fact, their absence had been a catalyst for a kind of rebirth. Though emotional, fierce, vengeful, triumphant arc the original JSON template had described felt less like a plot outline and more like a personal transformation I was living. The initial emotional devastation had given way to a fierce determination, which had fueled a vengeful, albeit elegantly executed, plan, and was now blossoming into a quiet, profound triumph. This wasn't the loud, boisterous victory of a courtroom drama, but the subtle, satisfying click of a universe realigning itself. My roses, not literal ones from a garden, but metaphorical ones representing my well-being and self-esteem, were indeed blooming, nourished by independence and self-respect. The empty chairs at the metaphorical family table of this vacation were no longer a symbol of loss, but of liberation. I even started to think about my return home. Not with dread, as I might have before, but with a new sense of authority. Things would be different. The dynamic had irrevocably shifted. I would no longer be the endlessly accommodating matriarch, the bottomless well of resources and forgiveness. I had found my voice, my power, and I had no intention of relinquishing them. As my Parisian idyll neared its end, I booked my flight home first class, naturally. I deserved it. I also made a few mental notes about conversations I would need to have, boundaries I would need to establish. The old Eleanor was truly gone. The new Eleanor was formidable. And she was rather looking forward to seeing their faces when she finally walked back through her own front door, tanned, rested, and utterly unapologetic. The journey home was as smooth and comfortable as my flight to Paris had been. I sipped champagne, read my Proust, and reflected on the extraordinary turn of events. What had begun as a devastating betrayal had morphed into an empowering journey of self-discovery, and, yes, a rather satisfying dose of poetic justice. I felt a calm strength, a sense of centeredness I hadn't realized I'd lost over years of prioritizing everyone else's needs above my own. As the plane descended towards my home city, I felt no trepidation, only a quiet resolve. I knew the confrontation, or at least the awkward reunion, was inevitable, but I was no longer afraid of it. I held all the cards, and more importantly, I knew my own worth. I took a taxi from the airport directly to my own quiet, empty house. It felt peaceful, a sanctuary. I unpacked leisurely, placing my small watercolor of Paris on the mantelpiece, a constant reminder of my newfound independence. I didn't call Daniel or Sarah. I knew they'd find out I was back soon enough. Let them stew. Let them wonder. Let them, for once, make the effort. It was 2 full days before the doorbell finally rang. I opened it to find Daniel standing on my porch, looking haggard and considerably humbled. Sarah hovered behind him, her usual confident posture somewhat diminished, her eyes darting around nervously. Even Lily and Tom, who slouched resentfully by the garden gate, looked less like entitled teenagers and more like chastened children. "Mom," Daniel began, his voice subdued, almost hesitant. "You're back, indeed I am, Daniel," I replied, my tone cool and level. I made no move to invite them in. Paris was lovely. I highly recommend it. Sarah flinched almost imperceptibly. We were worried," Daniel continued, though his gaze couldn't quite meet mine. "We got back yesterday." "It was difficult, I imagine it was," I said, allowing a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. Travel can be so unpredictable when one hasn't planned meticulously, or when one relies on arrangements that no longer exist. The barb, though softly delivered, clearly landed. Sarah bristled, but Daniel placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Look, Mom," he said, finally meeting my eyes, a flicker of desperation in them. "About what happened at the airport, and Italy, we messed up. Badly. We are so sorry." It was the apology I had waited for, the one that hadn't come in any of their frantic, demanding messages from Rome. But hearing it now, it felt less important than I thought it would. My validation no longer hinged on their contrition. "Sorry is a start, Daniel," I said. "But it doesn't erase the callousness, the disrespect, the sheer audacity of your actions." We know," Sarah chimed in, her voice uncharacteristically meek. "It was unforgivable. We were. I don't know what we were thinking." "You were thinking of yourselves," I stated calmly. "As you so often do. You assumed I would simply absorb the blow, pick up the pieces, and continue to be your endlessly forgiving, endlessly providing mother and grandmother. You assumed wrong." I let the silence hang for a moment, watching them squirm. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been entirely redrawn. The empty chairs at the table of their Roman holiday had taught them a lesson far more effectively than any lecture from me ever could. "Things will be different from now on," I continued, my voice firm but quiet. "My home is my sanctuary, not a free hotel or a crisis center. My finances are my own, not a family slush fund. My time and energy are precious, and I will choose how and with whom I share them." Lily and Tom were now looking thoroughly uncomfortable, perhaps realizing that their future access to Nana's generosity was in serious jeopardy. "Good. We understand, Mom," Daniel said, his shoulders slumped. "We truly do. We want to make it right. If you'll let us." I looked at them, my son, my daughter-in-law, my grandchildren. The anger had largely dissipated, replaced by a weary sort of clarity. The fierce, vengeful fire had burned down to a steady, warm glow of self-possession. "Making it right will take time, Daniel," I said. "And a great deal of effort on your part. It will require consistent respect, genuine consideration, and an understanding that I am not an afterthought, nor an ATM. We will see." I didn't invite them in for tea. I didn't offer hugs or platitudes. I simply stood there, the embodiment of my newfound boundaries. They had left me alone at the airport, not knowing I had paid for the entire trip. So I had decided to teach them a lesson they would never forget, and in doing so, I had rediscovered myself. The roses of my revenge had bloomed, not in a fiery explosion, but in the quiet, dignified assertion of my own worth. And that, I realized, was the sweetest triumph of all.